Conservative candidate Nigel Evans. Good morning to you.
Julia, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Very, very well indeed. Now, a number of the papers who were supporting the Tories in this election campaign and being supportive of Brexit over the years, very much going with the Tory attack line that was put out by your press office last night about the fact that Boris Johnson failed 9 times to answer whether or not he would be backing and supporting Brexit in the event of him winning and there being a second referendum with Remain and a Labour deal. Is that the big win, do you think, for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives out of that debate last night?
Yeah, a lot of newspapers have run with that this morning. The fact is that it is the most fundamental issue of this general election. It is the reason why we're having the election in the first place. It is because Parliament has refused to back what the people voted for at the referendum in 2016. We've had a general election, Julia, where the Labour Party said they would deliver Brexit, and ever since that election, they've done everything to stop it, including 217 Labour MPs voting against the second reading of Boris Johnson's bill. So this was a fundamental key and at the very heart of this general election. And Jeremy Corbyn, even now, I do not know whether he would want to back his own deal that he's just negotiated with the European Union or not. But the essence is, I guess, that he wants to remain in the European Union. He's surrounded, his shadow cabinet is full of people who are Remainers. And what he doesn't want to do is let his voters in lead constituencies, particularly in the northwest and the northeast of England, which overwhelmingly voted Leave, he doesn't want to let them know that he is going to let them down badly.
It was undoubtedly the case that you could see that Boris Johnson had been briefed, keep getting everything back to Brexit. Even it came down to what gift he was going to give Jeremy Corbyn at Christmas. He ended up going with some damson jam, I think. But he personally suggested a Brexit deal. And undoubtedly that was the case. However, it did appear he was losing out on issues of, say, trust. And that was not, there was laughter from the audience. That was not helped by the fact that during that debate, Conservative Party press office, the CCHQ Press, the official hand of the Conservative Party press office, decided to change their official name to UK Fact Check. Now, this may have been an attempt at a joke, but if it was, it backfired spectacularly with lots of accusations that, look, this was an attempt to delude the public with fake news, to pretend that this was some independent fact-checking Twitter handle rather than a party political press office. Do you think that was a bad decision? And should someone be fired over it?
Well, I don't know whether they should be fired, and I think they should have an internal investigation to find out exactly what the intention was on that. You and I know that the vast majority of people are not transfixed to their mobile phones when these debates are going on, that they're looking at the characters of both of them on the TV. A lot of it is how they look, whether they look statesmanlike, whether they look as if they should be prime minister or not. I saw some of the tweets, I have to say, though, afterwards that you put out, Julia, which I thought was absolutely, it's amazing what catch people's imaginations during these debates. One of them was, of course, the new glasses or spectacles that Jeremy Corbyn was wearing, and whether they made him look a little bit more shifty than he otherwise sounded last night. But the fact is, I think that Twitter is only sort of an inconsequential part of what goes on in these debates, and the vast majority of people will be listening very carefully to what both sides are saying, and they won't have gone missed on people that Jeremy Corbyn just dodged the issue on Brexit time and time again. And I also, on the laughter bit, because I was in Salford last night in the spin room listening to it along with a number of journalists last night. And of course, we know that the audience is packed full of people who are more than politically motivated. And so the audience almost becomes part of the show. So when they are themselves trying to make it out that they're laughing at one of the two leaders last night, of course, they are part of the whole process.
That's part of the problem, isn't it? I mean, shouldn't it either be audience being told to be quiet until the end, perhaps, or, which is what happens in debates in the United States, or perhaps, having floating voters rather than people who were staunchly political on either side because again, I think it was quite an irritation to quite a lot of people, the constant clapping, some whooping, some heckling and the like. In terms of how your man did, though, given that Boris Johnson is the incumbent, given that Boris Johnson could have just refused to do these debates, as previous party leaders have done when they've actually been Prime Minister, Theresa May, David Cameron, others, or had a wider debate group of people rather than just a head-to-head. Boris Johnson is supposed to be the good performer. We would have expected him to have done better. Low expectations of Jeremy Corbyn, but in reality, a 51-49 split for Jeremy Corbyn is a win for him, is it not? Given that he was able to appear statesmanlike, he was seen and treated as an equal with Boris Johnson, despite being far behind in the polls. Has Boris Johnson not just handed a win at an early stage of this campaign to his opposing candidate?
No, because I think that if you remember the last election when Theresa May refused to do the debates at all, she was handing a win to Jeremy Corbyn in many ways because people took the view that she was running away from these debates. So I think, in 2019 as we are now, people are rather expecting that the leaders of the political parties at least come together from time to time in different formats. I mean, my own criticism was of the format itself. It wasn't so much a debate. When people were trying to get into the issues, anti-Semitism has been mentioned. I saw at one stage Boris Johnson trying to bring immigration into the debate. Of course, that was ignored totally in the end. So neither of them were allowed to drill down or properly engage with one another. So I do hope that as far as the future formats of not just this for future general elections, but of course there are a few other debates coming up with differing formats, that they can look at ways whereby it allows each of the leaders to at least be able to confront their opposition leaders with some facts on things like anti-Semitism, immigration and trust.
Okay, I would just like to have either of the men on my show so I can confront them with some of my questions. But there we are. Nigel Evans, Conservative candidate, thank you very much. Professor Sir John Curtice joins. He's Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. And let's face it, polling guru. Good morning to you, John.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Now, there was an instant poll, a SAP poll by YouGov last night, saying 51% for Boris Johnson, 49% for Jeremy Corbyn. But that, to all intents and purposes, is a score draw, isn't it? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's roughly, in fact, how I personally scored it. I didn't think that, neither person made a serious gaffe or mistake. Neither landed a significant blow. Both had their strengths and their weakness. So I think Boris Johnson was clearly intent on talking about Brexit, intent on putting Jeremy Corbyn under pressure on Brexit, but was clearly much less comfortable on the question about trust and personal integrity. Jeremy Corbyn, in contrast, was always trying to steer the conversation away from Brexit. So his lines about inequality and austerity and privatisation, to that extent at least, where they were trying to talk past each other. I thought Boris Johnson was rather more successful at tying... he had a very clear message, which he kept on repeating, but B, then was also, I think, rather more successful at providing some indication of how he proposed to implement his proposals in the next Parliament. Jeremy Corbyn seemed to be much happier attacking the government's record, was rather less specific in talking about, what a Labour government would do that was rather better. Both of them had a couple of good lines. Jeremy Corbyn's, he probably had the best visual gig, which was the producing the set of the alleged notes of a meeting with the Americans about trade and everything being redacted, and his quip about in response to chaos with a Labour government in hoc to the SNP, reference to 9 years of coalition chaos under the Conservatives. Meanwhile, of course, there was when it came to public spending, Boris Johnson had a nice clip that the Labour Party haven't just simply discovered a magic money tree, they've discovered a forest. So both of them had the odd
But
good line.
that's the key thing, though, isn't it? As you say, there were no gaffes. No one tripped up or stumbled on something, said something crucial, or had a complete blank moment. But again, no killer punches. I wonder how much... political journalists are obsessed with these things, and certainly TV broadcasters are always just sort of obsessed with getting that debate. And I know a lot of political journalists worry that actually too much much focus goes on these things and less with interviews with them. But how much do sensible, ordinary voters pay attention to these things when all the Westminster bubble gets obsessed with it? How much do people tune into these things, and how much does it affect their perception of people, and then see how much does it affect who they actually vote for?
Sure. I mean, the answer to, according to the polls, 40% of people were going to watch these things, but I suspect that's far too high. In truth, of course, is the way in which most people will hear about what happened last night was not by watching it themselves, but by listening to you this morning, Julia, talking about it, or on a whole variety of other outlets, both television and radio, as well as social media. And it's therefore, as it were, it's how it gets disseminated more broadly and what's said in the clips, etc., that matters. From what I have heard so far this morning, I'm not sure that either gentleman is going to particularly do well out of the secondary coverage. There's been quite a lot of focus on how the audience laughed at both of them at various occasions, and to that extent, neither of them, both of them on occasions, their credibility was being challenged. I think the other thing is true for those who were actually watching, and certainly if you're a political geek, I doubt if you learned anything very new. Now, on the one hand, you could say it was very good public service broadcasting, and for anybody who's not been following the debate in the last 6 months or so, you got a very clear outline of where the party's priorities and principal arguments are. But if you had, you really frankly didn't learn anything new.
No, indeed. But again, we know from the senior political advisors over the years and PR people that you have to keep hammering home these points before anyone outside the Westminster bubble hears. Let me just ask you also about some of the Snap poll from YouGov's specific questions. I'm wondering which is more important. Asked who do you think came across as more trustworthy, 40% said Boris Johnson, 45% Jeremy Corbyn. Who came across as more likeable, 54% Boris Johnson, 37% Jeremy Corbyn. Who was more in touch with ordinary people, 25% Boris Johnson, 59% Jeremy Corbyn. Who do you think came across as more prime ministerial? 54% Boris Johnson, 29% Jeremy Corbyn. So Jeremy Corbyn comes off badly when it comes to looking prime ministerial or being likeable. Boris Johnson, not trustworthy and not in touch with ordinary people. Which of those is the most damaging for those men? Well,
difficult to tell. I think my reaction to that is that probably you would have got much the same answer out of the people who replied to that poll in advance of the evening, because those are fairly standard figures that you would get from polls asking about the perception of leaders in general. And I think the point, therefore, is probably the real thing to take away that, given also that in the end the poll said 51% said Johnson's win, 49% Corbyn, neither of them really, therefore, scored a great advantage. But, of course, Jeremy Corbyn went into this behind. He needed a victory. Boris Johnson simply needs to hang on to what he's got. And I think given that backdrop, probably Boris Johnson is going to be happier with those figures than Jeremy Corbyn.
OK, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to speak to you, Professor Sir John Curtice. Let's talk to the former Labour Justice Secretary, former Lord Chancellor, Lord Charlie Falconer. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Well, let's talk first of all about the debate, and then we've got obviously some major announcements from your party as well in terms of a new report, Poverty Britain. In terms of the scoring, the YouGov Snap poll last night gave a narrow win, 51% to 49% to Boris Johnson. But many people, given that they had lower expectations of Jeremy Corbyn, he hasn't had the practice of TV hustings that we've had, of course, with the Tory leadership campaign earlier this year, they perhaps had lower expectations of Jeremy Corbyn. How do you think your man did?
I think he did well. I think what your previous commentator said, that we didn't learn very much about policy, is absolutely right. But I think we did learn a bit about both of the characters there. Boris kept coming back to the issue of Europe and Brexit, and we know what the party's positions on that are. The audience began to groan when he kept coming back to it, and it felt to me a bit like Mrs. May and Strong and Stable during the 2017 election. We know what you're saying, we've got to make a judgment about it, but show us a bit more depth about what you're really like. And I don't know whether in 2017 the public ultimately turned against somebody with just one sentence to say, but that's what it felt a bit like with Boris Johnson yesterday, when he kept rather archly returning to that point.
Well, you did, but of course we know the old rule, don't we, in politics? You know, at the point where people are bored, sick of hearing something, that's when the message only starts getting across. But again, we
tell
did
that to Mrs. May.
Yeah, but yes, that certainly didn't work for her in 2017. But of course, we also, Jeremy Corbyn again coming back to this issue. At one point, he was talking about we live in a country now that's it's just billionaires and people in poverty. Now, given that 95% of us are neither of those things, I mean, there seemed to be a bit of a sort of strange reaction to that as well. I mean, do you think that Jeremy Corbyn got across the message he wanted to get across when actually a lot of the front page today, admittedly Tory supporting Brexit supporting papers, are pointing out, and a lot of people on Twitter, that 9 times he was asked for his Brexit position, and and 9 times he failed to answer, and as much as people will be voting on a lot of different issues other than Brexit, certainly it's one of the key issues they will be voting on, in which case not having a position which people can actually be clear about in terms of where he personally stands on Brexit, that is going to damage him, isn't it?
Well, I think the public is very well aware that Jeremy's made it clear he won't say whether he's for Remain or Leave. And if there's a price to be paid in the election, then that was already known before the debate. You've said there are other issues in the debate. I thought on the health service, Jeremy Corbyn appeared much more connected with the actual human problems that they had.
When he talked about a friend of his who'd recently died very tragically.
Yeah, and that was a very moving moment, I thought, and it was in stark comparison to Boris, in effect making debating points. He referred to his, quote, 40 new hospitals promise, which I thought Jeremy did well to dismantle. But on your point about the economy, which is a very telling point, I think the position is that Jeremy made it absolutely clear that this is a pivotal election. This is should we have a change of direction? And he was clear about what he wanted to see in relation to that, increases in wages, an increase in the minimum wage, etc. I mean, I was very struck by Boris Johnson's response to that. He said he wasn't going to proceed with his corporation tax change. He said the UK was the lowest corporation tax country in the world, and he said that Jeremy would whack up corporation tax to the highest in Europe. It indicated he never sticks to his position. He tells fibs about what the position was, namely that the UK was the lowest corporation tax country in the world, and he attributed to Jeremy Corbyn something that he'd never said. But maybe more significant, it was all very, very bitty.
Yes,
Boris,
but that was partly down to the style, the format of the
I agree with that.
debate. And again, I don't think Julie Etchingham's fault. I think she did a very, very tough job very well. But fundamentally, if you're going to allow people to only speak for 30 seconds to make a point about a serious issue in our country, whether it's Brexit or the NHS or tax, you're going to get a bitty debate.
I agree, but Jeremy Corbyn, and you may like it or you may not, he got his big issues across, namely, for example, the fear of privatisation of the health service, for example, we need to change direction in the economy, for example, what his position was on Brexit. Boris and Johnson never really did, except on, I've got a deal, vote for it. That was the only point he got across.
Okay.
He also never stuck to time. He acted as the rules didn't apply to him. He mangled the facts, as I've indicated, and you've already drawn attention to the audience's reaction to the question about does he think the truth matters? And the audience, and I felt quite spontaneously, Julia, you will know that you can't treat the audience in these events as like being what the country is necessarily like.
Okay.
But it felt like a spontaneous reaction.
Well,
But
again,
Boris
I
is
think there was rather too much party political clapping, and frankly, I would rather have listened to it without all of that. It interrupted it for me. Let me talk to you just finally. Well, actually, one more I think I want to talk about, but before then, let's talk about in terms of the snap poll that YouGov have carried out that said that Boris Johnson narrowly won it, but I'd say look to me like a score draw on that front. In terms of asking specific questions about who came across in certain ways, Jeremy Corbyn did badly on likability compared with Boris Johnson, and he came across as less prime ministerial than Boris Johnson by quite a long way. However, he beat Boris Johnson by a very long way in terms of looking more in touch with ordinary people, but he also came across marginally more as trustworthy than Boris Johnson. What do you think of those as the key factor if people are voting for a party and for a prime minister? Being prime ministerial, in touch with ordinary people, being trustworthy, or being likeable? What's going to be the key factor there?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the thing that most people will be influenced by is what will the effect on my life be if either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn becomes Prime Minister. Being in touch is probably significant. Looking more prime ministerial, which Boris appears to have won on in that poll, I'm not sure how much that is significant, because does it not simply reflect that Boris Johnson is currently the Prime Minister and Jeremy is not?
OK, and just finally, today your party is publishing a new report, Poverty Britain, looking at the 10 ways Tories, they say, have failed to tackle poverty and entrenched hardship in society, and is pledging to wage war on poverty to reverse the damage of a decade of austerity. Now, this is playing very well, this conversation with staunch Labour Party members and in certain constituencies. But there'll be a lot of people who I mean, when you look at the polling in terms of, people have seen their wages go down relative to wages in 2010 because, of course, of the what happened with the financial crisis. But lots of polling on non-political polling suggests that most people are actually, quite happy with their lives, and although might be worried about finances and savings and the like, certainly don't view themselves as struggling in austerity in terms of struggling with poverty and the like. Is this playing just to a very narrow band of people as opposed to the vast majority of perhaps floating voters who don't see the country as an us and them, and don't see a country that is full of people who are living in poverty and a few billionaires? Is that a risk for your party?
I mean, it might be a risk in terms of public opinion, but I do think there are a lot of people who have suffered very considerably from austerity, namely the poorest, and not just those who have suffered are concerned about that. Separately from that point, I think a lot of people, even those who are comparatively well off, recognise that their lives are not going to be as good as their children's. For example, they've been able to have a quite good life economically, and they're not going to be able to hand that over to their children, even though they're not people in poverty. And I think that is a concern right across the board.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Lord Falconer, there, former Labour Justice Secretary. Let's speak to the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, for the Conservatives. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Very well indeed. I say very well indeed because I'm no longer watching an ITV debate which is permanently involving Julie Etchingham saying, let's move on. Thank you, Mr Corbyn. Thank you, Mr Johnson. How do you think the debate went last night for your man?
Look, I think he had a really positive agenda to set out. I think he knocked out of the park Corbyn's challenge on the NHS, making it clear the NHS would never be up for sale on our watch. And in contrast to the positive agenda he set out, you had Jeremy Corbyn 9 times refusing to answer which way he would go, which way he would vote, campaign on the question of leaving the EU. We're only 3 years out from the referendum, for heaven's sakes. And I think for all the sort of media commentary, the YouGov Snap poll showed that by 2-1, the voters found that Boris Johnson was more prime ministerial than Jeremy Corbyn. And that's, of course, the choice at this election.
Well, they found he was more prime ministerial, though. They'd also, by about the same, decided that he wasn't as in touch with ordinary people. They also didn't think he was as trustworthy as Jeremy Corbyn. Is that going to be a concern?
Well, I think on the issue of trust, on the seminal issue facing this country and the voters at this election, there's a very clear plan that Boris has set out. He's saying people can trust him because he got the deal within 3 months that people said was impossible. All we need is the MPs, the Conservative MPs, to push it through Parliament. And you contrast that, as you rightly ask, on the issue of trust. And Jeremy Corbyn can't tell you whether he's for or against leaving the EU. If he can't be trusted to give a straight answer to that question, what else can Labour and Jeremy Corbyn be trusted on? And
yet it was the audience's laughter at the question to Boris Johnson about trust, wasn't it? I mean, but Jeremy Corbyn was laughed at over Brexit, but your man, the Prime Minister, was laughed at when he talked about trust. That suggests that, OK, maybe in very partisan a section of the audience doing that, there is still an issue of trust when it comes to Boris Johnson.
I think you always get titters in the audience from one or other side, depending on who they support, and that's fine. It's part of the atmosphere of the audience. What really matters is the perception of your listeners and the viewers up and down the country. And as I said, on the absolutely key test, who is best placed to be Prime Minister, Boris Johnson won that by 2-1. And Labour needed, and I think we all know, and it's been commented, that Jeremy Corbyn needed to come and have a really good night. And I don't think he could achieve that when he can't answer 9 times the very basic question of, is he in favour of leaving the EU or not?
Well, of course, we've spoken to the polling guru, Sir John Curtice. I'm sure you know him well. He was pointing out, look, there was no big gaffe for anyone to pin anything onto, and no killer punch landed either. Lots of expectation was on Boris Johnson. he's been debating for years. He's been Prime Minister. He's had the practice, the rehearsals of the Tory leadership hustings as well. And yet Jeremy Corbyn didn't land a killer punch on him. Boris Johnson didn't land a killer punch on Jeremy Corbyn. And there wasn't sort of a big takeaway moment other than this headline about the 9 times on Brexit. Is that enough at this stage in the campaign for Boris Johnson and for the Conservatives to keep everything on Brexit and to simply point out that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't have an answer about how he would vote in a Brexit referendum if there were a second referendum? Is that going to be enough to win this election?
Well, no, the debates are never the key to the election, in my view. But Jeremy Corbyn, I think this is the only thing I disagree with you about. I think Jeremy Corbyn needs a big night because he's coming from behind, if you like, and he didn't get it. And it wasn't just the question of not being able to answer 9 times where he stands on leaving the EU. It was the fact that he was called out on his nonsense scaremongering about the NHS, and it was very clear that he would countenance a second Scottish referendum. So the choice at this election for voters is, do we go forward, get Brexit done with the deal that we've got, move on, talk about all the other issues we want to be talking about on the NHS, schools, policing, or do we go backwards with 2 referendums on Brexit, on Scottish independence, with all of the rancour, the division, and the uncertainty that would give? And that's the choice of voters at this election on the 12th of December.
Are we going to get a debate between you as Foreign Secretary and the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry? I'd watch that.
Possibly.
Would you like to do that? Have you been in talks about that?
I'll leave that to the people that manage the campaign. But I debate Emily Thornberry most weeks in the House of Commons, and I look forward to doing so again in the future.
OK, it's pretty difficult, though, for voters to make up their minds about any of this stuff, whether there's a debate or not, when we haven't actually seen the manifestos. Greens were yesterday, Lib Dems today, Labour tomorrow. When are we actually going to see the Conservative Party manifesto?
It's nearly there. We're poised, and it's going to be well worth the wait, Julia. So it'll be
nearly
out
there. So Friday, the weekend.
I'm not going to give you.
Have you seen
very
it?
Cunning.
Have you read it?
I've contributed to it, as many of the.
Have you seen the whole thing?
I'm contributed to it, and we look forward. I'm not going to give you a teaser now, notwithstanding your best blandishments, but it will be well worth the wait.
We're not in a situation we were with Theresa May in 2017, where actually the Cabinet didn't even see the manifesto before. And has the Cabinet been shown the full manifesto yet?
Well, I'm not going to go behind the weeds of the process, but we're not in the position we were in 2017, and we look forward to it setting out a really positive agenda for taking this country forward.
Do you think someone needs to probably fall on their sword or be sacked after the CCHQ Tory Party press office last night decided to change their Twitter handle to Fact Check UK? Could have possibly actually had that account closed down by Twitter, having breached their rules, pretending to be an independent fact-checking organisation rather than a completely partisan party political press office. Was that the right thing to do? And should someone go for that?
I don't think anyone can say we're pretending to be independent, because it had CCHQ written all over it. But the one thing we will continue to do is rebut the nonsense scaremongering being put around by Labour around the NHS. We're the ones with a £34 billion plan to invest in schools, hospitals, the technology, to the innovation to look after dementia patients and detect cancer earlier. And we'll continue to rebut the suggestions to the contrary from Jeremy Corbyn. And actually, I thought that was a really big moment in the debate yesterday when Boris Johnson said from the heart, the NHS will never be up for sale under Conservative watch.
Just finally, I know you have to go, but I want to ask you about a report also that the British Hong Kong consul worker, Simon Cheng, a trade and investment officer, he claims that he was held captive by the Chinese authorities and tortured for 2 weeks, attempting to get him to confess that the UK was masterminding the protests in Hong Kong against Beijing. What action is going to be taken about that? And do the Chinese authorities have a point?
So my first concern has always been with Simon and his family, and we've obviously been making sure we take care of him as best we can. I summoned the Chinese ambassador in. I made it clear this behaviour and this conduct was outrageous. His mistreatment, the credible allegations, claims that they amount to torture, and I have insisted, and the Chinese have accepted, that they will review and investigate those allegations and make sure anyone is held to account. And it's important to say they are, under international law, through the UN Convention Against Torture, duty-bound, as a matter of their international obligations, to investigate and hold to account anyone that is engaged in that kind of behaviour. It is disgraceful and totally unacceptable.
And are any of their allegations true?
Well, we believe they are credible. The
Chinese claim that the Britain has been basically fomenting the protests.
No, I think, look, fomenting, no. He may have been involved in a private capacity, certainly not through the official functions at the Consul General. But let's be honest about it, let's have some moral clarity. Whatever the case in relation to those allegations, and I've set the position out very clearly, none of that can ever be an excuse for torture.
Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab for the Conservatives, thank you very much. Good morning to you, Angus.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, of course, we didn't actually see a head-to-head debate with your party leader, Nicola Sturgeon, last night. She, along with Joe Swinson and also the Brexit Party leader, Nigel Farage, had one-on-one interviews later in the evening. But we know that, certainly from what Nicola Sturgeon had to say, she wasn't very impressed with the head-to-head debate.
No, I don't think anybody was. I think the overarching comment of the night was one by Laura Kunzberg, who said that the audience were happy to laugh at both men. Basically, the biggest mention of the night seemed to be about the SNP in Scotland, and we weren't there to put our side of the case, which basically shows it was a leaders' debate for England run by ITV.
Well,
as I said to you before,
it was a leaders' debate. Well, it was a leaders' debate for who's going to be Prime Minister of the UK. Nicola Sturgeon isn't going to be Prime Minister of the UK. She's leader of the SNP in Scotland.
Well, we know full well it's the English tail that wags the UK dog, because 80% live in the tail there. So that's the reality of the situation. But if we're talking about a general election rather than a presidential style, which is what the ITV were trying to turn it into, the SNP came out very well, because we're certainly talked about, and there's nothing wrong with being talked about.
Well, I mean, exactly. The Scotland issue, Scottish second referendum issue, was really a key part of that whole conversation between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson. And in terms of learning anything new, I mean, obviously your party has made demands that, look, Nicola Sturgeon said, don't bother calling me after the election if there isn't a majority, unless you're willing to offer that second referendum. But did you learn anything new from what Jeremy Corbyn had to say?
Not really, no. I mean, I think as a supporter of Scottish independence, like we both are, Jeremy Corbyn didn't give us much further information. All we know is that Jeremy Corbyn changes his position every few days. So, I mean, there's 3 weeks to go to the election. I'm sure 3 weeks after the election, Jeremy Corbyn will have a vastly different position to the position Jeremy Corbyn has today.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Angus MacNeil from the SNP. Very much appreciate that. Now, let's turn our attention to that debate and let's talk to Richard Tice, chairman of the Brexit Party. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. Very first debate we've had of this election, just a head-to-head between the two men leading the two largest parties. Of course, Boris Johnson's support in the polls has gone up considerably since the Brexit Party decides to stand down candidates standing not just in Tory seats, but also a few dozen as other seats as well. Should Nigel Farage and other party leaders have been in that debate, or was it right to have a debate just between the two men who realistically, according to the polls, have a chance of being the next Prime Minister?
I don't have a problem with the former. I mean, I think just what was extraordinary during last night was the quantity of laughing from the audience about responses from both of the credible future prime ministers. That says something about people's views of them, and that actually is a message that I'm sort of hearing on the doorstep as I campaign. The first half hour of the debate obviously was all about Brexit. And, we in the Brexit Party were encouraged that Boris Johnson reconfirmed that there'll be no extension of the transition period from December 2020, so that, we would definitely, effectively leave then properly, either with a simple free trade deal or with a clean break. And wasn't it interesting that Jeremy Corbyn, about 9 times, he refused to say whether he would campaign to leave or remain. And actually, Julia, the simple reason why he wouldn't give that confirmation is the deal that he would put to the British public in a second referendum would be remain or a fudged remain. So leave would not be on the ballot paper. And that's why we took the decision not to stand against Conservative MPs, because we wanted to make sure that the option of a second referendum effectively is taken off the table, and that's what we've done, and we believe that we've ensured that.
Well, it was an hour-long debate. The first half hour, as you say, was about Brexit. The second half hour on other issues, the economy, the NHS, and others. Well, Boris Johnson kept bringing it back to Brexit, and of course, the big issue is this going to be the Brexit election or not? Now, the Labour Party want it to be about public services and about austerity, about poverty. The Green Party say it's the Green election. Tories, Brexit Party, very much want to make it about Brexit, to deliver Brexit. Liberal Democrats, the SNP, to stop Brexit. In terms of the reaction you're getting on the doorstep and the seats that you've chosen to stand in, and the seats you've chosen to stand candidates down in, are you of the view that this is a Brexit election, or is actually, there's an expectation that people want to discuss, at the general election, there's a clue in the name, they want to discuss more issues, more general issues about how the country's run, and actually running purely on Brexit isn't going to be enough?
I think genuinely it's a 50-50, and often that depends on the nature of the constituency that you're campaigning in. When I'm campaigning, 7 out of 10 voters voted to leave, and they're genuinely utterly furious that politicians have basically refused to carry out the wishes of the majority. But in other constituencies further south, it's different. But there are many other issues that come up on the doorstep. So I do think it's 50-50. The other tragedy is when I hear, and it really makes me sad, that people say, that's it, I'm never voting again. I'm so angry with politicians and the way they've carried on. And that comes back to the issue about trust in politicians, carrying out the will of the people.
And just finally, can I talk to you also about this police investigation we understand now into these claims made by Nigel Farage and others in the Brexit Party that the party candidates were offered peerages, job offers from senior figures in the Conservative Party in number 10, is the allegation, in return for standing down as Brexit Party candidates in this election. Are you aware of, were you yourself offered anything? Are you aware of any specific offers and who those offers were made by?
I wasn't specifically offered anything, but some very bad stuff went on last week with different people from various parts of the Conservative Party at a whole range of different levels, using extraordinary intimidation, bullying offers to try and persuade our candidates to stand down. And regrettably, in some cases, they succeeded. And we made a unilateral gesture to take a second referendum off the table. And that's how the Conservative Party responded. Thanks very much.
Richard Tice, Chairman of the Brexit Party, thank you very much for speaking to us. It's 11 minutes past 9 o'clock. Let's turn our attention back to the Labour Party now. Former Labour Mayor of London, no longer a member of the Labour Party, Ken Livingstone joins us now. Good morning to you.
Hi there.
Good morning. Now, of course, you've been a long-time ally and friend of Jeremy Corbyn and John MacDonnell, of course, from your days at City Hall in London. What did you make of how your friend performed in that one-on-one, head-to-head TV debate last night?
Well, I think he did better than Boris. I mean, the image most people will remember of that debate isn't about any of the particular issues. It's just the fact that Boris talked over Jeremy and the presenter all the way through the programme. And all he ever wanted to talk about was Brexit. And I think Brexit will be a big factor in the election, undoubtedly, but people also are worried about just the quality of our lives has just got worse over these last 10 years.
I mean, do you think that, again, that's the issue? Actually, when people watch these debates, the nuances of every little, the coughs and the spits actually aren't remembered, but there's a general sort of mood music, like who got laughed at, and this perception, and again, that perception, it was noticeable to me that Boris Johnson kept going over his allotted time, and I think that was a problem with the format. But again, if you know that's the format, then you need to stick to the format.
Yeah, I think that literally, I think back to the debates I had with Boris in the two mayoral elections, he would talk over me. But the striking thing was he always just said what he thought the audience wanted to hear. You never really know what he believes in. I think the thing about Boris is he just wants to be a famous celebrity. He doesn't have a great political agenda. And that's why he's quite happy to just keep going on about Brexit, not get into a serious debate with Jeremy about how to rebuild our NHS or restore the tens of thousands of jobs lost in our schools.
But again, there's no doubt at all your man, Jeremy Corbyn, definitely wanted to keep it onto those sort of issues. He talked about, we live in a country with billionaires and people in poverty. And he kept talking about austerity and problems. Even with the NHS, lots of people, love the NHS. It's, I understand, after Brexit, the second biggest issue of this election. And when people are actually asked who've used the NHS, do you, how satisfied are you with the care you've got? They've got something like 90% approval. I mean, most of us would, on work, would love to have those sort of approval ratings. We're constantly told that, things are getting worse. But again, families, we know in terms of what happened with the crash, but we know also that a lot of families report, being satisfied in their jobs and where they are in life and like. Do you think that when Jeremy Corbyn talks about there are billionaires and people in poverty, given that 90% of people, aren't in either of those categories, that actually he's very much just talking to his party faithful rather than talking to perhaps the floating voter in the middle of the country who is going to be the person who decides this election?
No, you see, I think we need to be realistic. I mean, I'm 74. This last 10 years has been the worst in my lifetime for the provision of public services. We've seen,
Did you not live through the 1970s?
That was nothing like as bad as this.
Really?
If you chat with...
I can remember rubbish. I can remember vividly being at primary school, and I remember rubbish piling up on the streets, and I remember my school being closed and having to go and sit in my parents' office because the schools weren't open.
But basically the problem there was that at the end of 1973, Saudi Arabia persuaded all the oil-producing companies to quadruple the price of oil overnight. And across the whole world, millions of jobs were lost.
Okay, all right. Let's not go back. I mean, I'm just saying. My perception is different. But again, lots of people have a different perception. I'm just asking whether the majority perception in this country will be that things are getting worse.
People are aware of that. They've got kids. I mean, kids now very insecure. Are they going to get a decent job? Will they ever be able to afford to buy a home? Will they ever be able to afford to rent one? You look at the number of kids now continuing to live with their parents well into their 30s because they can't afford. I mean, largely because Thatcher stopped building council houses and shamefully Blair carried on with that policy.
So, but this is the case. So again, even if where there are problems, and even go back to austerity, and people say, well, that happened back, when the before 2010. When Gordon Brown was in charge, I mean, there may be an element where people, even the stuff they don't like, or the stuff they do like, they don't really attribute it either by blaming or by praising any particular political party. They kind of think, well, a plague on all your houses.
Well, the simple fact is that the average person today, their wages are not as good as they were 10 years ago. I mean, under this government, we've seen the worst decline in the quality of our life, as I say, in my lifetime. And I think people are aware of that. There is an insecurity. It's all right if you're like me, you're old age pensioner, you've got your pension coming and you've got your home and all that. But for that vast generation rising up now, the good jobs, so many of them have been wiped out. And so much of the work now is insecure, 0 hours contracts, stuff like that.
But it's not. Most of the new jobs that are being created, I mean, again, this is just official ONS figures. Most of the new jobs created are, in fact, full-time jobs. They're not 0 hours. Fewer than 2% of people work in 0 hours, and the people 75% or something of the people who work in 0 hours say they're happy with those hours. I mean, those aren't my opinions. Those are studies and facts that have been put out there. Yeah,
but you just got to look and see the position we're now in is not as good as it used to be. And it's getting worse all the time.
And just finally, I mean, how often do you see Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, I mean, since I was accused of being anti-Semitic 3.5 years ago, basically I've been out of politics. I've bumped into him a couple of times at parties.
You don't have such a place. Do you know there's claims last night, and it's been going around Westminster for quite some time, and lots of people were commenting on the glasses that Jeremy Corbyn was wearing last night, and they clearly have quite different lenses in the left and the right eyes, and some people are saying that the reason is because it's glasses which are often are actually suggested to people who've had a stroke, which has affected one side of their body. Do you know whether or not Jeremy Corbyn has or has not had a stroke?
If Jeremy had had a stroke, I mean, so many doctors and nurses would have been dealing with him. It would have been all over the media. Jeremy's not, I mean, he would have been out of sight for days, if not weeks. I mean, literally, it's a load of old nonsense. He just, like most people of his age, are wearing glasses.
No, I mean, obviously, my parents are around his age and they wear glasses, but they don't have completely different lenses in different eyes.
People don't, because you basically,
No, I'm just putting the question to you.
Deteriorating at the same time. But, I mean, Jeremy hasn't had a stroke.
Okay, all right. Okay, Ken Livingstone, thank you very much indeed for joining us, former Labour Mayor of London. Joining us now is Lib Dem Foreign Affairs spokesman Chuka Umunna. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Good morning.
How are you?
Very well indeed. I suppose we must ask you about the TV debate last night. First up, of course, your party leader wasn't on it. Jo Swinson, she'd asked, actually sued in the courts for the right, along with Nicola Sturgeon, to be on that debate. She also complained that it was sexist that she wasn't involved. But in the end, it was a head-to-head between the two men. But given how well it went, should I say well in very loose terms, she may have been better off out of it.
Well, there are a lot of people saying that this morning, and what an appalling...
Oh, goodness, the line seems to have gone down. Just at that rather crucial moment. Chuka,
can you hear me?
We can hear you again. Yes,
sorry,
could you start again, sir? I'd appreciate it.
Sorry, I was just going to say, a lot of people have been saying that about the debate, and, I mean, what an appalling choice viewers were presented with, and thank goodness that's not the only choice that they have. But, I mean, I think there were three kind of big points for me that came out of it. First of all, I mean, it was ridiculous to be having a debate where a huge part of the argument was absent from the room. There's a substantial portion of people in this country who want to abandon Brexit, and they were not represented in either Boris Johnson, clearly, or Jeremy Corbyn, who, I thought he let the Prime Minister get off scot-free. And secondly, both of them, in their own way, clearly posed a threat to the Union, which is the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson was exposed as being responsible in his plans for definitely leading to there being a form of hard border between the UK and Northern and Southern Ireland. And Jeremy Corbyn refused to rule out holding a second Scottish independence referendum. And then I think the third point was trust, frankly. And it was revealing that really when both the party leaders sought to kind of said, trust me, or say that trust in politics was very important. And they were laughed at by the audience. And that's no surprise because the Prime Minister is an inveterate liar. And so for him to say that he's somebody who believes trust is an important quality in politics is rather not credible. And with Jeremy Corbyn, who likes to hold himself up as an anti-racist campaigner, he has, of course, overseen the Labour Party when there has been a proliferation of anti-Jewish racism, which has been so bad that the party is now under investigation by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So it really was a really awful choice for the viewers, and thank goodness they have something. They have other options, including my leader, Jo Swinson.
Okay, although the latest polling has said that actually, the headline of the Times yesterday, the more the voters see of Jo Swinson, the less they like her. Actually, she's not polling very well at all.
I don't know about that. I mean...
I didn't conduct the polling and I wasn't polled, but that's what the polling is saying, unless we're not going to believe any polls.
No, I'm not saying not to believe any polls, and polls, of course, go up and down. And I haven't... I've seen the headline, but I haven't actually seen the detail there. And if you look at the net unfavourability ratings of the two main party leaders, they score very bad. And what I would say is that with these polls, generally politicians as a whole, we don't do very well. It's a question of who
or us journalists.
Unliked, if you like, or journalists. So that's why I'm slightly careful about passing judgment on them, I suppose.
Okay. Let me just bring you some breaking news. There's been quite an outcry on Twitter. And I have to say, I was complaining about it very early on in the debate when I noticed that it's part of the Conservative Party, CCHQ Press, their Twitter handle, they changed their name to Fact Check UK. And we've been accused of, not just as a joke doing it, but actually effectively trying to convince people that they were an independent fact-checking site, which do exist online. In various social media forms, but when in fact masquerading as that when they knew that might fool some people. There have been Twitter has issued a reprimand, but now the Electoral Commission, of course, have a legal role in this. A spokesman has said voters are entitled to transparency and integrity from campaigners in the lead up to an election, so they have the information they need to decide for themselves how to vote. The Electoral Commission seeks to deliver transparency to the public through the political finance rules. While we do not have a role in regulating election campaign content, we repeat our call to all campaigners to undertake their vital role responsibly and to support campaign transparency. This is being seen as quite a criticism of the Tory party HQ. What would you have to say about that?
Well, I think the idea that they should present themselves as a fact-checking organisation is a bit like a bunch of arsonists saying that we should give them the power to go and firefight. It's a big old symbol of fake news, the idea that a Conservative Party-run Twitter handle is a independent fact-checking organisation. And, I mean, it just is further evidence that they are further adopting the kind of techniques of the person on whom so much of their work and campaign and politics is modelled, and that is President Donald Trump.
Okay, well, yes. Okay, well, let's move on, though, and talk about what you're going to be announcing in your manifesto today. £10 billion for schools, 20,000 more teachers and investment in our children's future. How are you going to fund that?
Well, obviously, the core of our manifesto is to stop Brexit. We have less than 3 weeks now, or 3 weeks to do that. And if we stop Brexit, what it actually means is that we can focus on the issues that confront us as a country that have been ignored for far too long, and it will enable us to invest more money in our public services. And so if we remain, we estimate that we will be able to raise a £50 billion Remain bonus, and that is a Conservative estimate, and we will use £10 billion of that to put into our schools with a £4.6 billion immediate cash injection to provide for 20,000 more teachers, because we don't have enough teachers. But there's going to be lots more in the manifesto too. We need to tackle the climate emergency that confronts us. So one of the things you will see there is that we want to ensure that by 2030, 80% of our energy is coming from renewables.
Is that doable? 80% of energy or 80% of electricity?
80% of our energy to
from renewables
by 2030.
I mean, currently a small percentage of our electricity, which is about, something like 20-30% of our energy needs, is provided by that. How are you going to have renewable energy providing what currently provides, for instance, our gas boilers and powering our factories?
Well, you have to work in tandem with the private sector on that. One of the things you will see in the manifesto is our capital infrastructure fund. The private sector, some would say, are part of the problem here, but they're very much part of the solution. If we want to green our economy, we've got to make those investments.
But you think that's doable in the next 10 years? I mean, it may well be doable by 2050, but doable in the next 10 years? Does the technology exist that we can do? I mean, the only countries that have that have managed to sort of decarbon to that extent are relying on nuclear power. So will we be relying on nuclear power?
Well, we don't rule out. I mean, we accept that nuclear power will need to be part of our energy mix in the interim, en route to achieving more of our energy coming from renewable sources. But we've got a fully comprehensive plan on that. Like I said, I mean, the exact detail of it you will see in the manifesto on how we get to 80% of renewables by 2030. But you have to be ambitious. And the other thing is that with so much around the green economy is if you actually set a target and set out plans and what government's going to do to invest, but also, not just provide the carrot, but have a bit of stick, it leads to the encouragement of new markets in those particular areas. So when government previously in the past has said that we want to make sure that we insulate so many homes, it has led to whole new industries around architecture, companies in the kind of retrofitting space coming about to actually go and do that, which leads to the creation of more jobs and also means that we're not wasting energy. Okay. So that's just one example. There's lots else in there, for example, keeping commuter fares down. You'll see lots of detail, but the bottom line is unless we stop Brexit, we can't actually focus on these real issues.
All right, Chuka Umunna, Liberal Democrat Foreign Affairs spokesman, thank you very much indeed.